A lot of people think aging means you just naturally are going to get weaker, softer, less flexible. The truth is, some physiologic changes do happen, but a huge amount of what people experience is not simply age.
The 30s are where life load usually starts to compete with training load.
In your 40s, this is often when the bill starts to come due, right? Recurrent back pain, tendon irritation, weight gain, and reduced tolerance for unplanned physical stress.
In the 50s, I say muscle is not about strength and structure. It is really our metabolic engine. Aging well is not about trying to look 25 forever. It is about keeping the physical capacity to live fully in every decade.
Welcome back to Everyday Longevity Collective. Today, we are talking about something that sits right in the middle of performance, injury prevention, and long-term health. It's strength, body composition, and load tolerance as we age. A lot of people think aging means you just naturally are going to get weaker, softer, less flexible, and less capable. The truth is, some physiologic changes do happen, but a huge amount of what people experience is not simply age. It is underloading, deconditioning, and poor recovery due to low muscle mass and loss of movement competency over time. Higher muscle strength is consistently associated with better function and lower mortality risk, and resistance training improves strength and physical function well into our older age.
And this matters for both men and women, but not always in the same way. Hormones, body composition shifts, pregnancy history, menopause, bone health, metabolic health, and lifestyle patterns all change the picture. So today, we want to break down what people should actually be thinking about in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and far beyond. Not just to look better, but to move better, tolerate life better, and stay independent longer.
Exactly. We're going to define a few terms, then walk decade by decade and talk about what tends to change, what matters most, and what the training priorities should be for men and women.
Okay, so to start, let's define the three anchors for today: strength, body composition, and load tolerance.
When I say strength, I do not just mean how much you can deadlift. I mean your ability to create force, control force, and absorb force. That includes maximal strength, strength endurance, and as people get older, it especially includes power and the ability to generate force quickly. A rate of force development declines with aging, as is closely tied to functional performance.
And body composition is not simply weight. The much better metric that we use for metabolic health is body composition. It is the relationship between lean mass, fat mass, and where that fat is distributed. So if you think about it, two people can weigh exactly the same, but have very different metabolic health and physical capacity. During aging, especially for women during the menopause transition, fat mass tends to rise and lean mass tends to fall unless we are actively challenged.
Then there is load tolerance. Clinically, this is your body's ability to handle the stress placed on it, whether that stress is a workout, carrying luggage, playing golf, getting up off the floor, picking up a grandchild, or reacting to a slip. If tissues, joints, tendons, bone, and the nervous system are underprepared, the same task that used to be easy becomes irritating, painful, or injury prone.
This is a key longevity point. We are not training just for the gym, right? We are training for the demands of everyday life in the way we want to be conducting it among our friends and family. And the research is very clear that multi-component exercise, combination of strength, aerobic work, balance, and functional movement is what improves physical function, frailty outcomes, and quality of life in older adults. So really thinking long-term is important here.
In your 20s, the goal is to build your reserve. This is where a lot of people can accumulate muscle, build tendon capacity, improve movement quality, and establish the habits that protect them later. The problem is that being young can hide bad training. You can get away with poor sleep, random programming, and no recovery until you cannot.
So, this is an important time to think ahead. For both sexes, the 20s are the time to build muscle mass, connective tissue tolerance, good movement mechanics, high aerobic capacity, and consistency with diet like high protein intake and training frequency.
For men, the common issue is confusing intensity with quality. They choose loads that before they earn controls. For women, I often see the opposite: plenty of work capacity, but not enough progressive resistance loading. That matters because muscle mass and bone loading are protective assets later in life, especially for women. Resistance training in women, including postmenopausal women, improves strength, physical fitness, and body composition. Exercise training also benefits bone mineral density in postmenopausal women.
So, the message for the 20s is really simple and focused. Don't just stay active, get objectively stronger. So, that means committing to 2 to 4 resistance sessions per week, enough protein, and a program that includes a variety of lower body strength, pulling strength, single leg stability, trunk control, and sprint or power exposure if appropriate. Consensus recommendations for adults and older adults consistently include regular resistance work for major muscle groups, plus balance and neuromotor training. All right, well, moving on now to the 30s. So, this is where performance really meets real life. The 30s are where life load usually starts to compete with training load. Things such as career, family, kids, higher stress situations, sleep disruption. This is where many people don't stop caring, but they lose the ability to structure.
And when training becomes random, body composition usually follows. So you start to lose lean mass momentum, daily activity drops, your stress rises, and people quietly become less resilient. Then they say, I'm just getting older. But no, often they are just getting less prepared.
For women in the 30s, this may be a time that includes pregnancy, postpartum recovery, pelvic floor changes, changes in sleep, and a mismatch between effort and recovery. The answer is not avoiding load, it is just better planned out progression. Trunk and hip integration, rebuilding pressure control at the pelvic musculature, and returning to strength with intention.
So for men, the big problem is you often become less flexible, stiff, and your body fat starts to creep, especially around your midsection. You can't continue to train like you're 24 and think you're going to recover like you're 24 because you're not. And so this is where you really need to start changing your framework of how you're working out and how you're managing those issues.
A good goal to shoot for is in the 30s is 3 days of resistance training, 2 to 3 days of aerobic work, and at least one exposure to power, speed, or faster intent, and daily movement minimums. We've talked a lot about incorporating steps, tracking them, try to make movement part of your regular routine. And also, another tip that we've talked through is ensuring you have adequate protein distribution across the day to really complement this movement routine. Protein plus resistance in the end remains a clear strategy for preserving and building muscle. And higher physical activity doses in older adults we know are associated with lower all cause and cardiovascular mortality.
So just adding to that, in your 30s, this is when you want to also start incorporating some mobility into your training. It's a good time to start maintaining and working on your flexibility and adding those functional movement exercises in between your exercises. That way, you're not losing mobility as you get stronger.
And I know you've told me this is really where the injury prevention comes in or makes the difference, right? In those people who are really doing the mobility.
Definitely, definitely. And in your 40s, this is the decade of, whether you're going to drift or you're going to intentionally rebuild. This is the decade where the gap starts to widen. So if you trained well and stayed consistent, you can still feel extremely capable in your 40s. If not, this is often when the bill starts to come due, right? Recurrent back pain, tendon irritation, weight gain, lower energy, loss of speed, and reduced tolerance for unplanned physical stress.
So potentially, if you'd started in 20s, 30s, you've had 10 to 20 years of preparation for the 40s. This is a decade where body composition changes become more meaningful. A modest loss in lean mass combined with increasing visceral or central adipose or fat tissue can change everything about our metabolism, our insulin sensitivity, our joint loading, chronic inflammation and inflammatory levels levels and tone and recovery quality.
Yes. And this is where I tell patients stop using scale weight as your primary scorecard, right? You want to start looking at your strength trends, your waist circumference, your lean mass preservation, walking capacity, or your aerobic fitness. You want to check your grip strength, make sure you're not losing your ability to, keep a dead hang or carry heavy weight for periods of time. Your sit to stand ability without using your hands and how your body handles repeated effort. Grip strength is increasingly viewed as a useful biomarker of overall muscle function, and low strength is central to modern sarcopenia screening frameworks.
We definitely need to take that into context, right? Because we don't want you just sitting on the couch working on grip strength alone. It really reflects a bigger strength status. For women in the 40s, this time may overlap with perimenopause, which potentially, again, we're now understanding can start even in the 30s, but really is most symptomatic in our 40s. And so this is when we see body composition can start changing even more rapidly. So data from the SWAN study and related studies show that around the menopause transition, fat gain really accelerates and lean muscle declines. That's the concept of sarcopenia or muscle loss that we've been mentioning.
That's why, especially for women, the advice is not to do more cardio. The answer is usually keep strength training, increase training quality. You're really focusing on the quality of exercise and making it more functional and increasing your load tolerance. You're protecting your sleep and making sure you're getting good sleep quality, prioritizing your protein in every meal, managing stress throughout the day, whether that's with deep breathing and or meditation, and keep loading your bones, your muscles, and your connective tissue. Stay functionally active for the activities that you want to do.
And for men, the 40s are often when the absolute strength may still look decent, but mobility, tissue tolerance, and aerobic fitness are quietly changing or possibly degrading. Men can still move heavy loads, but often lose the ability to tolerate frequency and recover from volume.
So, a lot of 40 something men are still strong enough to hurt themselves. What you really want to be doing are doing the things that protect you for the activities that you want to do. Maintaining jumping in your routines, light plyometrics, working on again increasing your mobility with every decade. So my windows of time of spending doing active mobility before my training become longer and larger, and spending more time within those functional movements becomes a bigger part of the plan.
How do you address a lot of women in general? Sometimes a concern that has been voiced to me by patients is that they don't want to get bulky by weight training. How do you offset that question?
Yeah, honestly, we answer that one pretty straightforwardly. It's difficult to put on muscle. I wish it was a lot easier to put on muscle than it is. But the reality is, you're not going to build bulk from increasing load. You're going to create, greater capacity for your muscles. You're going to create better recruitment. But building large size, that should not be your worry or concern. Loading your bones, your tendons, and your muscles really are the goal for long term health and wellness.
And that brings us to the 50s. This is really where we see muscle steps up in the longevity role. In the 50s, I say muscle is not about strength and structure. It is really our metabolic engine, and it becomes a major longevity tissue. And this is because it really affects how we use our glucose, dispose it, use it, store it. Our metabolic health in general is very influenced by our muscle, which is very dense with receptors for insulin, for anti inflammatory markers, for hormones. And so it's very involved in our overall metabolic function, and not to mention fall risk and just general independence and mobility.
And this is a decade where many women go through or complete menopause, which changes the conversation significantly. So, lower estrogen is associated with shifts towards higher fat mass, more central adipose deposits, and lower lean mass. Bone density is countered here.
And we should really emphasize, and we want women, in the 50s and above to understand that you are not fragile at this point, and you really should not stop loading, but do it with intention and progressive load, as we've talked about here before. You just may need also more intelligent recovery and individualized progression. So, resistance training remains one of the most effective interventions for preserving function and body composition. Higher volume resistance training may produce even greater hypertrophy or growth of the muscle with responses in postmenopausal and older females.
And then when we're speaking about men, the 50s are often where there's a mismatch between remembered capacity and current capacity. So they remember what they used to lift, but their tissues are operating with different recovery dynamics. This is where low tolerance needs to be trained systematically. So you want more gradual progressions at this stage, repeated exposure, lower spikes in workload, and better movement variability. You're going to mix up your exercises. You're going to try to become more dynamic, more functional, so that you're loading the tissue properly so that it can handle the stress, again, that you're putting it through at this stage, and you're giving it proper recovery.
To summarize, for both sexes, the training priorities in the 50s are strength training at least twice a week, ideally 3 times, keep or rebuild power safely, aerobic base work, balance and single leg control exercises, protein adequacy in the diet, and recovery discipline, especially personalized to your history, your progression, and your routines, and possibly injuries too, to incorporate into your routine. Exercise that includes resistance and balance components is especially effective for physical function and fall related outcomes in older adults. So, this is something you want to start working on decades ahead.
So now when we get to our 60s and beyond, the conversation becomes very practical. Can you get up from the floor? Can you carry groceries? Can you climb stairs without using your arms? Can you react if you trip? Can you keep hiking, golfing, traveling, and playing with your grandkids? Now we start grading things on, keeping yourself functional and active and doing the things that you enjoy.
And this is where people often will focus just on being careful. The evidence supports resistance training, multi component exercise through these decades, and balance work, especially here for maintaining physical function and reduced frailty related decline in older adults.
And we have to emphasize power, not just force, but speed of force. A fall happens quickly, catching yourself happens quickly, and even crossing a street will need to happen quickly. The ability to produce force fast declines with age and matters for function.
So, in the 60s, 70s, and beyond, programming should still include the following. And you'll notice this is a lot of the same concepts, even in the younger decades: lower body strength, hinge and sit to stand patterns, carrying, pulling, step up capacity, balance, and appropriate faster intent movements when safe.
This means not reckless plyometrics for everyone, but appropriate speed, intent, and reaction that could be things like fast sit to stands, medicine ball throws, quick step drills, controlled power based machines or cable work, brisk uphill walking, loaded carries. We do a lot of things to still maintain quick reaction, both in the feet and the hands, so that you're able to handle that stress. What happens if you fall, you're able to get your hands up quickly. If you trip, you're able to move your feet quickly enough to catch yourself.
And for women especially, bone and muscle need continued mechanical stimulus to remain at healthy levels of density and healthy levels of lean muscle mass. And don't forget, events like a hip fracture at this age can really lead to very high levels of morbidity and mortality that we see across the population. So, muscle and bone health are tightly linked, and exercise remains one of the key shared interventions. Okay, moving on. So, really talking about a little bit more in depth how men and women differ. So, what really is different? We'll aim to make this simple. Men and women both need strength training, aerobic work, and good body composition management. The foundations are definitely the same, but the difference is in timing, physiology, and emphasis.
For women, the major inflection point is often perimenopause to menopause. Lean mass becomes harder to maintain, fat distribution often shifts centrally, bone health becomes more important, and recovery may feel less predictable. Doing more cardio and less food can backfire in that way.
For men, the issue is often less dramatic hormonally in the short term and more cumulative behaviorally. And this can be important, especially in a relationship, to understand these differences in partners. Sometimes it can be frustrating or hard to understand what your partner is going through, but just to keep in mind these differences. So for men, some of the behavioral changes that can lead to some of the declines are more around declining activity, under recovered hard training, abdominal fat gain, mobility loss, and reduced tissue quality from inconsistent loading.
Another important point: women are not small men, but they also should not be underloaded. In a large 2024 cohort analysis, women showed greater relative reductions in all cause and cardiovascular mortality from equivalent amounts of leisure time physical activity than men.
So, the message is not that women need less. The message is that women often benefit tremendously from structured exercise, especially resistance training, and should not be steered away from it.
If someone asks for the shortest practical prescription for longevity and function, mine would be strength training 2 to 4 times per week, hit every major pattern weekly. So a squat, a hinge, push, your pulls, carry, rotation, and gait training. Keep at least 1 to 2 days of aerobic conditioning, and that can be zone two, that can be brisk walking, or things of that nature, and it can be a sport. You want to move daily, right? We have our 10,000 step goals, but the quality of those steps matter, right? So if you can do increased pace and then slow it down, it's all about that accumulation of quality movement. Eat enough proteins to support your mass, right? We're saying, anywhere from zero point 0.8 to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight. And you want to reassess your grip strength, your sit to stand, your carrying capacity, and your body composition periodically. We try to do this regularly with our clients so that we're never losing too much ground and we're always staying on track with our goals.
And I would add to that, stop judging fitness only by body weight, the number on the scale. Body composition is far more important than body weight. And in addition, waist circumference, lean mass trends, strength, energy, and functional markers are also really important. And just like other labs and blood work that you get, measuring these metrics is also really important to understand your baseline, the changes that you're seeing over time. And so start recording these early and often. And as you continue your planning through your natural aging, think of your reserve. So, how much capacity do you have above the daily demands of life?
The reserve is what protects you when life gets hard. Make sure you're building that reserve and your body's ability to handle that stress is in that reserve time.
So, in closing, aging well is not about trying to look 25 forever. It is about keeping the physical capacity to live fully in every decade.
And strength is central to that. Bodybuilding for its own sake, not ego lifting, but building and preserving the muscle, the force production, and the load tolerance that keep you capable, resilient, and independent.
So, whether you are in your 30s trying to rebuild after kids, your 50s managing menopause or midlife body composition shifts, or your 70s trying to stay strong and independent, the answer is usually not less movement. It's better movement, better loading, and better progression.
So here are some key takeaways that we hope you get from this episode. Strength is a longevity marker, not just a fitness metric. Higher muscular strength is associated with lower all-cause mortality, and resistance training improves function and quality of life.
And as you're collecting your data, remember body composition matters more than weight on the scale. Lean mass preservation and limiting excess central fat matter more for function and metabolic health.
To our females, remember you need more, not less strategic loading through midlife. Menopause is associated with adverse shifts in lean mass and fat mass, and resistance training is one of the best countermeasures.
Power matters with aging. The ability to produce force quickly declines, and it is linked to function and fall resilience.
The best training for aging well is multi-component: strength, aerobic fitness, balance, and function. Try to incorporate all of those into your whole plan.
So thanks for joining us for our episode on strength training at our podcast, The Everyday Longevity Collective.
Thanks for joining us. We look forward to the next conversation.